our tech. Thanks, Lloyd. I'm sure more people are going to be joining us as Lloyd lets them in from the waiting room, and we will get started. So welcome, I'm Karen Bentrup on the planning committee here for PDA, Progressive Democrats of America, the Central New Mexico chapter, and we're so happy to see so many faces that we recognize. So everybody take a moment. If you want to turn on your video, we'll just take a moment to kind of wave and look at each other and say hi, like just hi to our good friends. We welcome Senator Harold Pope. Of course, Senator Antoinette Sedillo Lopez is here as one of our speakers. We appreciate everyone who's active in the Democratic Party in your county and statewide, and everyone who's active in so many different progressive areas. So welcome. Logistics wise, I think we've all gotten pretty good with our Zoom. Excuse me. So remember that you're muted and that we do have closed captioning. So if you go, generally it's to the bottom, to that toolbar. If you do not see closed captioning, you can select the 3 ellipses that say more, and you'll see show subtitle. Now I will offer this closed captioning that we've been using. Does a pretty good job if folks speak slowly and clearly. But if you get animated and excited, it will turn it into something really fascinating. So just gonna let you know that. So, and we're also going to continue to do our questions in the chat. So please have your chat function open. If you have any questions for Maya or Senator Sedillo Lopez, you can put that in the chat. Please put a capital Q, and that way our tech team will know to look for that means that's a question, and they'll start gathering the questions, and we'll ask those after our speakers have done their presentation. Let me just take a look at my list, see if there's anything else. I think Laura said it, and PDACNM may begin to meet in person. We may also do a hybrid, like many folks are doing. Maybe we meet in person periodically, and we also have Zoom. So more information on that, please stay tuned to the monthly newsletters and the action alerts that arrive in your email. And then speaking of action, PDA is one of the co-sponsors of the Medicare for All rally this month. So please get out there on Saturday, July 24th from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's that little park, it's like a parklet off of Lopez across from UNMH. So UNM Hospital, Lomas, little parklet. There's lots of parking if you kind of go behind it. Make sure to wear your t-shirts, bring signs, and then of course, water bottles. I just dropped it into the chat for you to remind you. So that's Saturday, the 24th. PDA, both local, state, national, is such a strong supporter and prominent fighter in getting us Medicare for all. Healthcare is a right. Like environmental justice is a right, and we need that for all of our people. So this evening, we're so very happy that Laura Lucero has been our program organizer, inviting Senator Antoinette Sedillo Lopez and Ms. Maya Van Rossum here to be with us. And we're so pleased to have just a packed and really uplifting program with actions. So our tech team is going to be dropping things into the chat. There are going to be actions that you can take easily from home, calls, emails, text, writing. So all of us in PDA can continue to put our progressive boots on the ground. So thank you, Laura, for putting this program together for us. And Laura Lucero is one of our planning committee members and is also a retired city planner and attorney. And she is a tireless advocate caring for our planet. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Karen. That was sweet. I am so pleased that everybody has joined us. And I am sitting here in Minneapolis, very, very excited about this program. And I want to take the prerogative as the organizer to deviate for a minute and explain why I'm so excited. For the last 5 days, I've had the privilege and the honor of traveling north of Minneapolis about 5 hours to the White Nations reservation. and actually camping out with the leaders and water protectors. And if you are aware of the Line 3, the Enbridge oil tar sands pipeline coming through Minnesota, it's coming through this spot this month. This is the headwaters of the Mississippi River.
She's talking about it. Okay.
Can you hear me? Because I can hear someone. I hope this is working.
Yes, I hear you.
Wonderful. What I learned in my 4 or 5 days with the tribe and the water protectors is a much more visceral, gut level feeling about what we must protect and what's at stake in the future if we don't protect it. And I learned it from people who have been on the front lines for years, 7 years or more. And then I realized the light bulb clicked on while I was up there sleeping at the camp, that this is why we need the Green Amendment. If we had a national Green Amendment, if Minnesota had a state Green Amendment, they wouldn't be fighting as hard as they are on the front lines, taking legal action, taking risking arrest and doing frontline actions, and doing many different types of actions. They wouldn't have to do all of that, I think, if we had a Green Amendment on the books in Minnesota and nationally. And so I came back invigorated to Minneapolis yesterday, thinking this is what New Mexico needs. And that's what we're going to hear about tonight. I'm really excited tonight. I just came from the state capitol where the tribal leaders drove down this morning to meet with the governor to ask for a government to government consultation and meeting. And I think you'll even see it on the national news tonight. It was very emotional as well as heartwarming to hear some of the people I had met over the last few days speaking in the state rotunda in the state capitol. So I want to thank both Maya and Antoinette Sedillo Lopez for being the champions, because what we need is exactly what you're going to be talking about. And I don't think I'm exaggerating one bit to say this is a life and death discussion. And we don't have time to put this discussion off. We can't give it to the next generation to figure it out. We need to fix this now. And I think a very important tool will be the Green Amendment. So I am honored to have both of these guests to speak about this tonight. And I'd like to introduce them and give you a little bit of background, but they can add more if they wish. And then I'll lay out the roadmap for you for this evening. But as Karen mentioned, if you have questions, please put that in the chat. And we're going to get to every question if we can before the end of the evening. I think we're going to try to wrap this up between 7:15, 7:30. So we have a while to go. If we have enough time, we'll have lots of good questions. Okay, with introductions, Maya Van Rossum is the Delaware River Keeper, meaning she's the voice that speaks up for the Delaware River. We need a Mississippi River Keeper too. And we need the Rio Grande River Keeper. She's been leading this Delaware River Keeper network for nearly 30 years. She's the founder of the National Green Amendment Movement. And in 2013, Maya and her organization succeeded in getting a landmark decision from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which revived that state's constitutional environmental rights amendment. Since then, she's been working with many states around the country to help get meaningful constitutional environmental rights amendments passed. And we're going to hear more about those efforts. And many of you if not all of you, I bet, I'm not quite sure how many are on the call, on the Zoom right now. Many of you know Senator Antoinette Sedillo Lopez is our environmental champion in the New Mexico Senate and has sponsored a number of very important environmental bills, including in this last session, the Environmental Rights Constitutional Amendment. And she did that along with the help of Senator Souls and Representative Ferrari and Senator Pope. Thank you, Senator Pope. You're on the call, I believe. Before joining the New Mexico Legislature, Senator Sedillo Lopez was a law professor at UNM for nearly 30 years, as well as being active in a number of local organizations focused on immigrant rights, women's rights, and environmental protection. So I'd like to turn it over to Antoinette. We're going to hear first how important, why we need this in New Mexico. What are the critical issues facing New Mexico in particular that a green amendment might help? And then we'll turn it back over to Maya to explain the summary of the green amendment nationally, how it works and why it's so important. And followed by Antoinette again, who will discuss the proposed new green amendment to our state constitution and the plans for the upcoming legislative session. So if time remains, I'm hoping, and I hope this is okay with both of you, if we have time, to hear some of the arguments in opposition to a green amendment and why those arguments fail. And so I will turn it over now to Antoinette, and thank you, Antoinette, very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you so much for organizing a panel on the Green Amendment. Right now, this amendment is my highest priority environmental legislation for New Mexico. And I want to give a shout out to the co-sponsors, Representative Joanne Ferrari in the House, and Senator Souls, Pope, who is here, Stefanix, Ortiz-Pino, and just today, Senator Tallman emailed me to tell me he's in, and I believe more will come, especially with your urging, because I think that that will be a very powerful statement to have a whole lot of co-sponsors. But we'll talk about the plans for this session later. I'm going to start by telling you why New Mexico needs a green amendment. New Mexico has a very troubling history of environmental exploitation and abuse. And I'm just going to tell a tiny piece of the many, many stories that exist in our state. As you know, we have 6 or 7 microclimates ranging from Sonoran Desert to subalpine. So we are a really complicated state ecologically. Our state is beautiful, absolutely beautiful, but it's very delicate. Many of our, and very fragile. Many of the aquifers in our state do not recharge. So when we drill that pristine, beautiful million-year water and we pull it out of the aquifer, it's literally mining it, because when it empties, it is gone. The ancestral Pueblo people and the Dene and Apache groups that lived in this area from time immemorial faced challenges, but they were good stewards of the land. And during the mega drought, which they experienced and we're experiencing now, they were able to follow the water. They still live here, and as my colleague Benny Shendo said, they always will. The Spanish and Mexican people who came later and who decided to stay developed acequia systems and raised livestock and developed and learned to live off the land. They were quite conscious of the importance of the water and land to their way of life. You may have heard, agua es vida, water is life, and it's very much a value. And they actually, acequia people don't actually follow the constitutional prior rights doctrine. They share water, and they share water when it's there, and they also share shortages. Well, these vast lands are also rich in minerals and shale formations that contain oil and gas. And oil and mineral companies and oil companies have come to exploit the coal, the silver, the copper, the oil, the gas, the potash, the various minerals. And the mineral exploitation was tied to exploiting the people. And all of these exploitations of our minerals required extraordinary amounts of water. So I'm going to tell you one of the most egregious stories in the state of environmental exploitation, and that's the uranium mining in the northwest part of our state, and largely in parts of Navajo Nation lands. Companies came and they blasted 4 million tons of uranium. They generally hired Navajo and Hispanic men to take it out. And the men took it out with little equipment, little protection. When the Cold War fizzled and reduced the demand for uranium, they abandoned over 500 uranium mines through the northwest part of our state. Imagine that, 500 uranium mines. So recently, just in the last 2 days, I was in Gallup attending the Water and Natural Resources hearing. And at an event, one of the events that they held, I heard a story about a uranium company official attending a Gallup event in the 70s, calling Navajo lands a waste zone and saying nobody lives there anyway, in discussing what happened with uranium mines. Well, I will tell you about 250 Dene people, Navajo people live there. When I heard that story during that visit to Gallup, I thought about how recently one of my colleagues called the Permian Basin a waste zone. He said this because of the thousands of produced water spills throughout the region and the massive amount of methane pollution that occurs in that basin. The land there, if you go, they actually, I've taken what I call the terrible toxic tour. If you go there, you can see that what could be beautiful desert area and beautiful, just beautiful landscape is no longer beautiful. Unfortunately, the area is so reliant on the oil and gas industry that many people keep their mouths shut about the environmental impact because of the economy there. The population is about 58 Hispanic, and it's one of the larger concentrations of African Americans within our state is in that Permian Basin region because they work there. I believe to call it and treat it a waste zone is environmental racism. I've gotten calls and emails from people who live there thanking me for my legislation, my advocacy, especially my produced water bill, and my many attempts to work on the health issues in the region. And local people in the Permian Basin are getting harmed. Peggy Aucoin's family farm was devastated, was rained on for more than an hour when a produced water pipeline burst. Her family lost goats, chickens, and the family dog. I just heard testimony in Gallup from the state land office that the pipeline system in New Mexico, she called it the Wild Wild West. Historically, our state has kept very spotty records on pipelines. And I just learned that the financial assurances we have for removing and reclaiming a pipeline is $51 a mile. And it costs $211,000 a mile to decommission and reclaim the land over a pipeline. And I learned that not one of the groups, not one of the state agencies in our state maintain detailed geospatial data depicting the location and the ownership of pipelines throughout the state. Think about that. And I'm just talking about oil and gas pipelines. Produced water pipelines are not even on any existing reports kept by the federal and proprietary data sets that the state uses to try to find those pipelines. And the truth is, our environmental division and the OCD do not have the resources necessary to deal with the devastation that the oil and gas industry is causing. The issue of abandoned wells is going to be huge because those wells continue spouting off both liquid waste and aerosol waste, methane, mostly methane. It's very clear historically that our state government has not always put the land, the water, the flora, the fauna first. With the Green Amendment, that would change. It would make the environment a top priority. And mainly it would be a huge political statement to all of our elected officials and our state officials about what the population, what the people of our state want. Now, we do have some language in our Constitution, and I'm always citing it. Article 20, Section 21. It was passed in the 70s. Unfortunately, our Court of Appeals in the Sanders-Reed v. Martinez case found that this amendment, which is in the miscellaneous section of the Constitution, did not create a trust relationship between the legislature and the environment. The Green Amendment will create a trust relationship between the legislature and the environment. I invite you to join the movement and make a powerful political statement to our government officials that our environment, our land, our water, our air, our culture, our way of life are of constitutional significance to the people of the state of New Mexico. Let's put it on the ballot in 2022. And I'm very proud to be on the same presentation with Maya Van Rossum, the author of the book, The Green Amendment, which inspired me to believe that we need this in New Mexico. This book talks about her fight to use the Green Amendment in Pennsylvania and the successes she had using it and how a Green Amendment can fill in the gaps. She is the lead litigator of several cases, and she is going to tell you how it works. Thanks. Thank you.
Wow, what an introduction. So I'm going to just jump right in, Laura, because you gave me such a great introduction earlier. And Senator Sedillo Lopez, I can't thank you enough for that wonderful introduction and your kind words. You know, you are truly, when I talk about the Green Amendment movement across the nation and where it is being advanced most powerfully and most passionately, I always point to New Mexico. I point to New Mexico because of you. I point to New Mexico because of people like Laura and people like Terry Sloan and Susan Selbin and Senator Pope, who are on this Zoom, and others, because there's so much power and there's so much passion, and you are truly at the forefront, and I'm so grateful for that. I am going to do a screen share. Uh-oh, I've lost my screen sharing capabilities because I got popped off. So I'm just going to give a second.
We'll bring you back. Let me find you so I can add you as a co-host again.
Sure. So a number of you have heard versions of this talk. So for some of you, this might be a reminder or a refresher. There might be some new elements, but hopefully everybody finds something in it for them. But I do believe, from what I understand, is that we've got a lot of new people to the New Mexico Green Amendment movement. And so I wanted to make sure that we brought everybody onto the same page as we advance this discussion and hopefully work together and with Senator Sedillo Lopez and Senator Pope and Representative Ferrari and Senator Souls and all the other new sponsors coming on board to advance this movement in the state of New Mexico. I've already been given a beautiful introduction, so I won't go over who I am again, but I just want to say that it is because I have been doing environmental advocacy and environmental litigation through my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, that I really have come to this realization through that work, through experience, that our system of environmental protection laws here in the United States of America, whatever state you're in, is fundamentally failing us. And that we do truly need a new path for environmental protection. Now, often people say to me when I talk about the importance of having a new path for environmental protection, they point out, like here in New Mexico, people point out, like, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of environmental protection laws in New Mexico, and we've got regulations and policies and programs and agencies, all that are supposed to be dedicated to environmental protection and environmental justice. So how is it possible, Maya, that you're coming to our state and saying that we need something different and we need something more? Well, I'm saying that because New Mexico's system of environmental protection is fundamentally the same as every other state across the nation. And it is a system that is really focused on accepting environmental pollution and degradation as a foregone conclusion and sort of hopping to the end of the decision-making process, when all that's really left to do for environmental protection is to figure out which permit the government is going to issue to manage the who, the when, the where this pollution and degradation is going to be allowed to happen. The system of laws as a whole is not focused on prevention of pollution, prevention of degradation, prevention of harm first. It's also a system that has a lot of gaps. There are a lot of things that are not regulated under New Mexico laws and regulations, or don't get or didn't get regulated or addressed until it was too late, until after significant damage was done. Right, wrong, or otherwise, there is often poor implementation of the laws that we do have on the books. And inevitably, somebody gets into office at one point or another that wants to work to roll back the laws that we do have on the books. And as Senator Sedillo Lopez pointed out so eloquently, unfortunately, here in New Mexico, environmental racism is alive and well, with communities of color, indigenous communities, immigrant and low-income communities being continually and consistently disproportionately impacted by environmental pollution and degradation. And this disproportionate impacting, this environmental racism is not happening in spite of the laws that are on the books. It's happening because of them. It's happening because of how they're written and because of how they're implemented. And so as a result, as Senator Sedillo Lopez pointed out, we have communities across New Mexico that are being impacted by water pollution or lack of water, impacted by air pollution, impacted by contamination of all kinds. And of course, we're facing a climate crisis. And so we can tell whether you want to do an analysis of how the law works or whether you just want to look at the reality of what's happening on the ground. We can see that something is missing from this system of laws and government that's supposed to be protecting our environment, that's supposed to be ensuring true environmental justice for all people. And I would suggest to you, the topic of tonight's meeting is exactly what we're missing. You know, what we need to do in New Mexico, which is the same thing I believe we need to do in states across the nation, is we need to raise up our rights to clean water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. Raise them up so they are given the same legal recognition and protection as the other fundamental rights we hold dear, like the rights to free speech and freedom of religion, private property rights, even the right to bear arms. These rights are all given higher constitutional legal standing and protection than our rights to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. And so how do we accomplish that? Well, we accomplish putting environmental rights on par with these other fundamental rights by putting in place meaningful constitutional recognition and protection. And I stress the word meaningful because the truth is not just any language will do. The reality is I have looked at every single state constitution across our nation, and I can assure you that almost every single state, all the states in purple and all the states in green, talk about the environment in their constitutions. But there are only two states, Pennsylvania and Montana, that have given the rights to a clean and healthy environment the same highest constitutional standing and protection as those other fundamental rights, like the right to free speech, like the right to freedom of religion. What Pennsylvania and Montana have is what I have come to define as a green amendment. Now, a green amendment has a lot of elements. There are elements that cannot be sacrificed, and there are elements that are incredibly, incredibly important if you really want to do the most effective job at giving constitutional recognition and protection. And so what are some of the fundamentals that Pennsylvania and Montana have? What are some of the fundamentals that New Mexico needs to have if it wants to advance this idea? Well, it has to have language that is added to the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. This is non-negotiable. The Bill of Rights is where we talk about those other fundamental rights we hold dear. That is the place, that is the space. We must recognize and protect our environmental rights. The language needs to be clear that we are protecting the rights of all people, and it should be talking generationally, the rights of present and future generations. We need to be clear about what is it that we're protecting. We need to be clear we're protecting the rights to clean water, to clean air, and a variety of important qualities of the environment, like the natural qualities of the environment, the cultural qualities of the environment, the human health qualities of the environment, and so on. Amongst the states in purple, right? One of the things a lot of those states do is they have language in the Bill of Rights section of their Constitution, but they're protecting things like the rights to fish, hunt, and trap, or to navigate waterways. These are certainly valuable parts of our society, but that is fundamentally different than protecting the rights to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. The language should be recognizing the individual rights of all people, that we all have the right to a clean and healthy environment, as well as the duty of the government to act as the trustee of the natural resources for the benefit of the beneficiaries, who are the people. That language is legally very, very important. The language needs to be self-executing, meaning it has legal life just on its own. As soon as the language gets added to the Constitution, those terms are enforceable. If people are having a problem accessing, are having a problem accessing clean water that could rise to a constitutional level, if they can't find a law to rely upon in trying to seek a remedy from government officials, they can rely upon the constitutional right to clean water. And it has to apply throughout all of government whose power emanates from the state. So the local town council up to the state legislators, the governor's office, and all the administrative agencies in between. The Green Amendment and the obligations identified in the Green Amendment do not apply to sovereign tribal authorities. But the rights enumerated in the Green Amendment do apply to the people, the Native American people, wherever they are on New Mexico lands, because everybody in New Mexico is entitled to the rights articulated in the state constitution. Now, a lot of people do say, wait a second, we've got Article 20, Section 21. Doesn't that protect our environmental rights? Article 20, Section 21 is not a Green Amendment. And we can see that just by looking at the language, right? Article 20, Section 21, as the senator said, is first off, it's in the miscellaneous section of the Constitution. So it is not putting the environment on par with those other fundamental rights. And it talks about the environment as being of fundamental importance, as the senator said. So that is different than talking about the environment as a right. But I think amongst the most important things that we find in the language of Article 20, Section 21 is the part that's highlighted in pale green, right? So it talks about the protection of the environment being of fundamental importance and in the public interest. And then it says the legislature shall provide for the control of pollution and control of despoilment of the air, water, and other natural resources of the state. Notice the focus on control, and also notice that what this language really does is it tells you that your legislators should legislate on environmental issues. That is actually what you are entitled to. You are not entitled to a right to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. You're entitled to have your legislators legislate with regards to the environment. The legislators already have that authority. And again, when they exercise that authority, it's subject to all the fundamental failings that we began in this talk, right? It is the situation that already exists, and yet we experience all of these environmental problems despite that. So we can see that this language, both by its placement and by its terms, doesn't fulfill the definitions of a Green Amendment. And we can also see that it isn't fulfilling the same role that a Green Amendment would fill. Well, I just went through this, so I won't go through this again, but not in the Bill of Rights section. You know, it's not talking about protecting environmental rights or preventing degradation. It's talking about control of pollution, control of despoilment. It's talking about the passage of laws, whether those are good laws or bad laws. That's not the same as the right to clean water or clean air. Again, it is empowering the legislature. That's a situation that already exists. There's no generational language. There isn't a place in there for strengthening environmental justice and more. So fundamentally, Article 20, Section 21 is different. And the senator mentioned this Sanders-Reed case, one of the, or really the only case that really has spoken to Article 20, Section 21. And the court was very, very clear. That Article 20, Section 21 gives the authority to the legislature, and that if people don't like what the legislators are doing with that authority, they can vote them out of office. And that's what the senator said. Again, it's fundamentally different. You can't rely on this to vindicate your right to clean water or clean air. You can, if you don't like what your legislators are doing, vote them into or out of office. So I have been going across the nation trying to share with people the power and importance of raising up the right to a clean and healthy environment to that highest constitutional level, and spreading this good word through the book, through my talks, and through the Green Amendments for the Generations movement. And, you know, there is such powerful energy that is growing across the nation for this pathway to protection. And at this point, we have 13 states, with New Mexico right at the front of the line, but 13 states where we have Green Amendment proposals that are at various stages of the process, with more states coming on board all the time. And I would suggest to you that New Mexico is amongst the states where the energy and the passion for this movement is the most powerful. It is the state that I point to most frequently when I talk about the power and importance of this pathway for protection. So let's just go really quickly. What would it mean to have a Green Amendment in the state of New Mexico? I can't talk about all the specifics, but broad strokes. It would mean that environmental rights are given the same highest protection as those other fundamental rights. We all know how powerfully the right to free speech and freedom of religion are protected. Private property rights are protected because they're in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution and our federal constitution. That same power now comes to bear for the environment. It would mean that every government official at every level of government whose power emanates from the state has a clear obligation to protect the environment and protect the environmental rights of all the people. And they have to protect those rights for both present and future generations. That generational long-term thinking is so powerful from an environmental protection perspective. They would the Green Amendment would fundamentally reorient government decision-making. So it doesn't hop to the end of the process where we're thinking about what permits are we going to issue to allow pollution and degradation, but it focuses all government decision-making on prevention of harm first on day one of the decision-making process. Think about it. When a government official is about to pass a law that might infringe on the right to free speech or freedom of religion, and somebody points that out to them, what do? They step back and they try to figure out how they can advance their effort in a way that will not infringe on the constitutional right. So right from the beginning of the decision-making process, the rights come to bear on how government officials do their work. The same would now happen for the environment. There would be a new layer of protection. It wouldn't just be about the statutes and the regulations on the books. Government officials would now have to ensure that they were looking to protect the constitutional rights. They can't just check the boxes. They have to do that overarching thinking, because the Constitution is above the law, guides the law, informs the law and its implementation. Green amendments are very empowering from an environmental justice perspective, because now every individual, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomics, where they live, we all have the same constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. And every government official must protect the environmental rights of all the people equitably. There can no longer be environmental sacrifice zones. It becomes constitutionally prohibited. Informed decision-making becomes of fundamental importance when you have a constitutional green amendment. Government officials must think about existing conditions, existing environmental burdens, the science and cumulative impacts as part of the decision-making process. It must impact the decision-making process. It's not just an information gathering exercise that you can put on the shelf and ignore. It has to be utilized in the process. The Green Amendment now, in terms of the laws that already exist in the state, they are now strengthened because all of those laws are now interpreted with this new lens of protection of environmental rights for all people equitably. So it reorients and strengthens the interpretation and the application of the laws that we already have. It fills the gaps. If there are issues causing water contamination or air contamination or soil contamination that rise to the constitutional level, and there's no law or regulation already on the books to address it, people can now turn to the Constitution for the legal protection that they need. Green amendments are very empowering for advocates, right? Because now we're no longer just dismissed as tree huggers or fish lovers, right? We are now people who are fighting for a constitutional right. It really is empowering and strengthening for the advocates themselves and how they think about this important work that they are doing for themselves. But it also reorients how people in the audience or on the decision-making dais think about environmental advocates, because they are now striving to protect a constitutional right, which is given that a fundamentally different standing and stature in the eyes of others when that's what people are engaged in. Here in the United States of America, whether people agree with you or disagree with you, if you're fighting for a constitutional right, they view you differently. That now happens for the environment. Green amendments are powerful, powerful legacy tools, right? Laws can be passed and undone with relative ease. The same is not true for a constitutional amendment. So once we secure it, we are likely to have it forever. In other states, green amendments are securing bipartisan support, all partisan support, right from the get-go in terms of the sponsorships. There's no reason why that couldn't or shouldn't happen in New Mexico. The goal of a green amendment is to get better decisions in the first place. Advance the good, prevent the bad. The reality of a green amendment is that when our government officials get it wrong, people have access to the courts to vindicate their constitutional rights to a clean and healthy environment. And these court cases are not neighbor versus neighbor. The Green Amendment is about government authority and how it uses its power and ensuring that government is doing what it can and what it must do to protect the natural resources of the state and the environmental rights of all the people. This is the language that we're currently talking about for the New Mexico Green Amendment, that the people of the state have the natural, inherent, and inalienable right to a clean and healthy environment, including water, air, soil, flora, fauna, ecosystems, and climate, and to the protection of the natural, cultural, scenic, and healthful qualities of the environment. And it's very, very clear that all aspects of the state, that the state, including every political subdivision, shall serve as trustee of the resources of New Mexico and conserve and protect and maintain these resources for the benefit of all New Mexicans, including present and future generations, and that it is self-executing. And this language would in fact end up replacing Article 20, Section 21, which, as the senator has said, hasn't done the job that the people of New Mexico want and need. New Mexico's Green Amendment has amazing support. Over 40 organizations, including PDA, right there. I can't point to it on your screen, but you can see it there in the middle to the right, one of our early, most powerful supporters. So the Progressive Democrats of America in central New Mexico have been a powerful and important supporter of the Green Amendment movement almost from the get-go, and we really appreciate that. Now, in other states, or Pennsylvania and Montana, the two states that have a Green Amendment, this amendment is really making a difference. It's being used by people, by government, municipal government, and state government to better protect the environment and the environmental rights of all people. It's been used by municipalities to support better decision-making at the local level to protect natural resources. It's been used to check the passage of legislation that was a real overreach and frankly, a huge gift basket to industry that to the degree that it rose to an unconstitutional level. So it's been a check on bad legislation and regulations passed by the legislature. It's been used to address problematic permitting that would allow highly contaminating, polluting, and devastating actions and activities to advance in Pennsylvania and Montana in ways that would not just harm the environment, but would harm local economies dependent on a healthy environment. It's been used by state government in the state of Montana to protect itself from having to advance an action or activity that would have been otherwise been required by law that could have resulted in the contamination of an entire town's drinking water supply. So the state government used the Green Amendment to protect themselves from inflicting harm on their constituents. It's being used in a variety of ways, including spurring government who failed to address a long existing toxic contamination condition in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The Green Amendment has been used to spur and inspire, shall we say, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to clean up a long ignored toxic site that was having a spreading pollution plume and inflicting incredible harm on residents as well as businesses. It's been used by government officials that want to advance good legislation. It's been used by attorneys general in Pennsylvania and Montana to support their enforcement of existing legislation. And it can be used here in the state of New Mexico to really advance powerful and important environmental protection. So if you want to get involved in the Green Amendment movement, www.nmgreenamendment.org is a place where you can go and get connected, sign a petition, find information, learn about trainings, and really get engaged. We've got weekly strategy discussions, an ongoing Google group action team, and a lot of ways just for you to get engaged and get involved. So with that, I hope that I've taken you to the point where you agree that New Mexico, that all the people of New Mexico have a right to a constitutional Green Amendment, and that you will support the actions and activities of Senator Sedillo Lopez and her legislative colleagues.
Thank you, Maya. That was very, very helpful in setting the stage about what happens now in 2021 and the next session, 2022. And I'd like to turn it back over to Antoinette to explain her thoughts about where we're going logistically with the Green Amendment in New Mexico at the Roundhouse.
Thank you so much. And you can see how inspiring Maya is, and how, I mean, I met her. And when I met her, I was kind of down. I said, oh, we have Article 20, Section 21, and nobody pays attention to that. That's all we need is another statement that nobody pays attention to. But then I read her book, and I saw what it was able to do in Pennsylvania and what it was able to do in Montana and the successes they had. And I realized environmental activists and those of us who care about the environment need a tool. So we did put it on the legislative agenda last session. We worked on it, and Maya, if you wouldn't mind putting the language up of the amendment, please. The New Mexico language. Okay, so our amendment started looking very much like Pennsylvania's, and then we got into the Rules Committee, and we went back and forth, and we came up with, I think, a very strong amendment. And I also wanted to point out something that I neglected to mention when I started, and that is, notice in New Mexico, we have protection of the natural, cultural, scenic, and healthful quality of the environment. Wait, where is it? Cultural, there it is. The protection of the natural, cultural. That is in no other amendment in the United States. Cultural was suggested by advocates, by Native American advocates, and that would help them with so many cases like that they have, the Chaco Canyon situation. I don't know if people followed the whole Blue Lake situation, but this would have been another tool, another negotiating stick for them to use to protect their cultural rights. So we came up with this language, and I think it is very, very strong. I think that the back and forth in the Rules Committee was good. It did not make it out. From there, it went to Judiciary Committee, and it did not make it out. It never got a hearing in Judiciary. So this year, the strategy is to start it in the Senate and the House. So we'll have two mirror bills. I've learned something in the time I've been here. We'll have two mirror bills, one going through the House and one going through the Senate, and then they'll cross over. The hope is that when it comes over to the Senate from the House, if it goes faster there, and I actually anticipate it would, because there are many more environmentalists in the House than the percentage I think is higher than in the Senate. But when it comes, the argument would be to send it to only one committee, and before it passes. It does not need the governor's signature because it is a constitutional amendment. So last time it was Senate Senate Joint Memorial 3. And if it passes both the House and the Senate, then it goes directly to the ballot. And that's what one of the things that some of my colleagues said, because I was disappointed that it didn't go farther, is, hey, it would have been on the 2022 ballot anyway, so you still have another year to get it on the 2022 ballot. So that's what we're going to try to do. And so that's the strategy, is in the two houses, and see if we can get it over the line and on the ballot. Once it gets on the ballot, we're going to come again, because we're going to need your help, because we're going to need a lot of people to talk about it, get people excited. We're going to need to full court press to get the votes. The amendment that passed in the 70s, it was the highest vote getting amendment in Bernalillo County. It got more votes than any other amendment, and that included the ERA, and it included the right to vote for 18-year-olds. So it was very, very popular back then. And I believe that it's a way to show our elected officials that the people of the state of New Mexico want this, they care, and they're watching.
Well, thank you, Antoinette. Can you share with us whether the leadership in the Senate and the House support this, or if they've expressed an opinion one way or the other?
The leadership has expressed support for it. They expressed support for it last time too. So we have good support, expressions of support. Now I want to get names on the dotted line.
Good, good. Is there an interim committee that this will be discussed at in the next few weeks or months?
Yes, it's going to be in Water and Natural Resources, and it's going to be it's probably going to be in September. We're shooting for July, but it probably will not be in July. And Maya's not available in August. So we'll probably try to get it in September. So I'm working on that, but it is on the agenda for the Water and Natural Resources Committee. The chair of the
Wonderful.
The chair of the Native American, I forgot, I think it's Indian and Rural Committee, that interim committee, she's going to try to get it on as well, because I think as with legislation that's environmental, people are starting narratives that are false, and I want to make sure that that committee has accurate information about this, that this is not going to, you can't, and you know this, Laura, you're a lawyer, you cannot pass state law and bind tribes. And so that really needs to be clear. So I'm trying to get it there, and she said that she would try. So those are the two committees that have the possibility of having the Green Amendment presentation.
Great.
And it's a real, Liz Stefanix is now a co-sponsor, and she committed to put it on the agenda.
Good. That's great. We do have several questions, and I'm going to ask the audience to put more questions, if you have them, into the chat box, but I have 4 or 5 already. One is let's frame it in a positive way. After it is added to our Constitution, doesn't it take years to vindicate our environmental rights in any kind of judicial process, which is always so slow? So wouldn't the environmental damage already be a foregone conclusion? So is it really going to protect us if you have to go through a judicial process that takes years?
I think one of and I want Maya to speak on this too, but I think one of the most important things is the lens that it will give to all state actors. You know, so the prevention work is what is the most important thing about this amendment. And yes, it takes a long time to use a court process, and that's all we have now. And so to me and also I really think it's going to motivate legislators who will see this thing pass and realize that their constituents are watching and they care about this. And so that's the power. But I was also thinking about, for example, permitting, the Mountain View permit for that hot tar asphalt thing. Mm-hmm. This would give an additional legal hook to the people who are opposing the permitting. And I guess the permit was granted. And so they're appealing that. But this would give, the way I like to think about it is it fills in gaps, so many gaps, all the way from permitting to production, to produce water loss. Mm-hmm. Maya?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I mean, I think it is important to recognize that it's not an instant panacea. But I think as Senator Sedillo Lopez said, first off, it does reorient government decision-making. Every government official, right, makes a commitment to uphold not just the laws of the state, but first and foremost, the Constitution of the state. And so having a constitutional obligation really does raise the bar on government decision-making in the first place. Having a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment could and should impact the political process. Everybody who's running for political office, to stay into political office, should be asked the question, what is your position on me having a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment? What is your, position on protecting the human health values, the cultural values, the natural values of a clean and healthy environment for all people? What is your position on equitable protection of the environment for all people, right? And then you start to get people on the record. And yes, you're going to have politicians that are going to try to greenwash. But as we all know, really asking those hard questions can really bring things out in the political process. And so we actually start to elect more and more people to office who believe in environmental rights, who once they get there, do a better and better job. So we're also politically raising the bar. And the threat and the reality of litigation to vindicate environmental rights and environmental justice when there has been an infringement. It does take time, but it definitely doesn't just move the needle, but it can move whole wheelbarrows of change, because every single time you set a new precedent, it impacts every decision moving forward, whether you're holding government accountable for failing to act to clean up a long toxic site, or whether you're defeating an unconstitutional law that is helping industry to avoid their environmental protection obligations and responsibilities. Whatever it is, every time you bring a legal challenge, you set a new precedent that impacts all decision-making moving forward. And so every victory, every precedent becomes another brick in the wall. And so we do, really, again, move wheelbarrows of change. I move a lot of wheelbarrows of wood chips in my garden, so that's why I think wheelbarrows. So it's not an instant panacea, but boy, oh boy, is it powerful in the many different ways it shapes how we think about the environment and the opportunities we have to protect the environment and environmental rights.
And don't underestimate the political power of it. We need that political will in this state right now. We don't have it. We've moved in that direction, the last election, but right now we don't have the political will we need to be as aggressive as we need to in these difficult times with climate change and everything happening. We need
Right.
just a much stronger political will, and this will help provide it.
Well, it sure sounds like it would level the playing field, because the public often thinks the industry, it's all in their favor and they've got the inside track. And I think hearing you both discuss it sounds like it's much more even between both sides in making arguments. But here's another one, and I think this one is related to climate change, although it's not stated in those terms. But will the Green Amendment allow cases to be pursued by the youth representing future generations and future harms?
Yes, I want to share a little bit more details with the story about the Sanders-Reed v. Martinez case. So the Richardson administration had passed a lot of regulations, not statutes, unfortunately, but these were state regulations that address both climate change and environmental ills in the state. And Governor Martinez summarily reversed them when she was elected, just summarily reversed them. And so a bunch of environmental groups and then Ms. Sanders-Reed brought a lawsuit using Article 20, Section 21 to try to say that that was unconstitutional and violated this constitutional provision. And the court disagreed, basically saying the amendment did not create a trust relationship between the legislature and the environment, and basically saying that, well, it just is a suggestion to the legislature to act, and they act, and if you don't like it, vote them out, which is a very unfortunate case. This amendment is crafted to reverse the outcome of that case, so that when we get environmental regulations, they can't just be summarily reversed, like the Martinez administration did, because it would violate the amendment.
Excellent, excellent. We've got another question here about grandfathering, and I'll just read it right off. Doesn't the Green Amendment impose a humongous obligation for expensive cleanup of existing pollution? Should the wording preclude that so as to make passage more palatable?
So can I just jump on this one really fast?
Right.
So we never want to, in any way, shape, or form, to grandfather in unconstitutional behavior. Right? So that is just, nobody would ever suggest to do that for the right to free speech, for the right to freedom of religion, for any of those other for civil rights, for any of those other fundamental rights that we hold dear. And so we shouldn't even conceive of that. We shouldn't even think about that idea when it comes to the environment, particularly the environment, which is so important to ensuring our health, safe, present and future lives. So think about it first off in that context. And the other thing is just to remember, right, we are putting in place a Green Amendment doesn't instantly and automatically, we don't instantly and automatically know what rises to an unconstitutional level and needs to be addressed, right? We really do have to look at each situation and apply the constitutional mandate. In terms of long ignored toxic contamination, every one of those situations has its own set of facts, has its own set of nuances that would have to be investigated and considered, and the Constitution applied. We wouldn't instantly know it applies here in this way and here in that way and here in that way. We would have to do the work to figure it out. So you wouldn't have this sudden massive, these industries go, this cleanup, it doesn't happen that way. You very literally, fortunately and unfortunately, are going to have to go case by case, situation by situation, and to figure out where do we have a violation of the constitutional right and how can we best restore it. And there may be many pathways to restoration. There may not be one solution. It's not going to be a one size fits all. And that's one of the values of going case by case.
Well, and I just want to add sort of on a practical level, this isn't going to all of a sudden give everybody a right to a pristine environment. It's going to focus on who bears the brunt of the harm. So, for example, with the Mountain View situation, because I noticed that's in the questions. So the permit was granted, and they didn't have a legal hook to say what you are doing is affecting this area that already has 2 Superfund sites, a sewage treatment plant, car I don't know if restoration is the right word for what they do with cars down there. And so this permit is unconstitutional because it creates an additional burden. So it gives that legal hook. And the other thing I wanted to say is there's already a lot of state and federal obligation to clean up sites. I mean, there's still, I believe Kennecott paid $1 billion to the Navajo the Navajo Nation, and they still haven't finished their obligation. So this just gives more impetus to enforce already existing obligations to clean up. And those obligations come from federal law, from state law, from tort law. The Aucoins got a settlement, a confidential settlement after their attorney wrote a letter to WPX for that toxic spill. And so now, and I want to make clear, this amendment doesn't create a private right of action against the companies. That would be a matter of tort law, and that's what they used as a matter of tort law. But it's the state's role. So the state had an obligation there to make sure that the cleanup was okay, and to test. And so this would give more impetus to the state because they had to look at everything that happens through the lens of the constitutional right to clean air, land, water, flora, fauna, and cultural rights.
And I think that's a very important distinction you just made for the non-lawyers in the audience about who can vindicate these rights and how it's impacted. I'm going to read off another question, and both of you might want to answer this as well. He asks me, how could I really use a snappy answer to someone who says the Green Amendment will simply give rise to a gazillion semi-frivolous lawsuits. Is there a snappy answer?
Snappy answer? A, protecting the environment isn't frivolous, and B, that's what the courts are there.
But will it?
So
Is he correct in assuming that there's going to be a gazillion frivolous lawsuits?
Well, it's hard to file a lawsuit. It's, you just don't sort of wake up and decide you're going to file a lawsuit. You really have to investigate the case. You have to have money to bring the case. The filing fees alone, you have to have an attorney. Attorneys have a legal obligation to make sure that they're not bringing frivolous cases.
Unless you're handling the 2021 election.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
the 2020 election.
Let's just say somebody lost his license about that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's I'm trying to think of a snappy way of saying it, but frivolous litigation, it's not as easy as people think to bring legislation. And what legislation tends to do is it tends to shine light on what's going on. The thing that bothers me about WPX settling that case so quickly, and I understand, I'm not criticizing the Aucoin family. They needed to get the heck out of there and pay for their medical bills, and I'm not criticizing them. But from a public policy standpoint, we don't know what was in the toxic water that was spilled on them for an hour. We don't know why they lost their chickens, their goat, and their dog. We don't know what was in it. Was there barium in it that caused that had radiation that caused the pustules to appear on their skin? We have no idea. If there was litigation about that, this all would have come out and been public. I'll be honest with you, I think that's why they settled it so quickly.
So
And Maya?
Yeah, so the sort of the ways that I handle it is, first off, as the senator indicated, and as you indicated, Laura, there are already legal limitations to prohibit frivolous lawsuits. And if a lawyer pursues a frivolous lawsuit, very literally their license can be at stake, as well as their reputation. So, but there are limitations that prevent frivolous lawsuits. That's number one. Number two, if we did have a massive onslaught of litigation to address environmental concerns and issues, they would not be frivolous. It would be because there was a real problem going on. And so if we suddenly had an onslaught of non-frivolous litigation that was happening, right, we sure as heck need a constitutional green amendment, because that means that we've got a real problem in the state that needs to be fixed. So that's sort of number two. So a massive onslaught of litigation can be a sign of a problem, and therefore a greater need for a constitutional green amendment. Number three, the number of frivolous lawsuits, the number of cases that have been dismissed as frivolous in Pennsylvania and Montana, where their green amendments have been, you know, a part of their legal arguments, zero, none, zero. The number of lawsuits that have been filed in Pennsylvania and Montana that have raised their green amendment language as an argument, 3 to 10 a year. That's it.
Wow, that's good. Well, that
At least
segues-
Pennsylvania is much bigger.
Yeah, that segues into a question about the Green Amendment in Pennsylvania and Montana. Have either of those states averted devastating environmental impacts because of their Green Amendment?
I want Maya to talk about her first case.
Yeah. So that, which is a great example. So in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, fracking had taken hold in the mid 2000s. And in the mid 2000s, while Pennsylvania had their Green Amendment language on the books, it had been declared by the courts to be just a statement of policy. So the language was there, but it didn't have any legal life. And it was during this 42 years where we had good language, but bad legal precedent, that fracking came to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, was polluting the water, contaminated the air, decimating the natural resources, making communities sick, giving kids cancer, and more and more and more, right? Advancing their highly polluting industrial operations and releasing climate changing emissions. But the frackers wanted to find a way to make it even easier for themselves to advance across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so they very literally wrote for themselves a law that was passed by the Pennsylvania legislature and signed by the governor in 2012. The law put in place automatic waivers from environmental protection standards. It alleviated municipalities of their zoning authority when it came to the fracking industry. So while communities could limit highly polluting industrial operations within their communities to certain parts of their communities, so industry was located with industry and not in the heart of their residential districts. When it came to fracking, this new law said, no, fracking gets to be located right in the heart of your residential communities. Operating, drilling, and fracking well pads can be allowed to be located by virtue of state law as close as 300 feet from people's homes. And it did a lot more: medical gag rule, eminent domain authority in certain contexts, and more and more and more. And so while fracking was already really bad in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, fracking was about to get a whole lot worse, exponentially worse, if this law had been allowed to go into play. It was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor in 2012. I and my organization knew that we had to find a way to defeat that law, but of course that's a difficult thing to do, right? You can protest, you can try to get it repealed, but usually once a law is passed, you don't have too many options. Well, we recognize that we actually had a tool that didn't exist in other states across the nation. We had this Article 1, Section 27 in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution that did recognize and protect the environmental rights of all the people. And so we challenged that pro-fracking law as being unconstitutional because it would violate the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And long story short, despite the fact that we had a very conservative Supreme Court in place at the time with a very conservative Chief Justice, we got an opinion in December of 2013 with the plurality opinion written by that Chief Justice that actually declared the provisions of that law that we were challenging to be unconstitutional because they would in fact violate the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And so we defeated the law before it ever got a chance to start and avoided all of that exponential growth and harm of the fracking industry, and at the same time overturn that 42 years of bad precedent. And starting in December 2013, gave people a truly enforceable constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. Since that time, we and others have been bringing more and more cases that have been avoiding harms, resulting in the pullback of damaging permits, preventing the misappropriation of environmental protection funds by Pennsylvania government agencies, securing the cleanup of that long toxic site that I mentioned, and much, much more. So we haven't had a living, thriving green amendment, but for a few years, and we're already using it in these powerful ways. And then you heard me mention that one situation in Montana. That was a situation where an entire town's drinking water supply would have been contaminated, but for the fact that Montana had this constitutional environmental rights amendment that could be used by the government officials to prevent the bad decisions that would have resulted in that contamination. So that's a long way of saying yes, yes, yes.
And a lot of these stories are in her book, which is why I got so excited. That's how Maya became my hero.
That's exactly what I was going to point out. That book behind Maya is a good one for everybody to pick up. And Lloyd, would you put the link in again? I think I gave the link for ordering that book. It's very, very helpful. It's already almost 20 after the hour, but I want to ask Margaret's question too and see if I have missed any others. So maybe if we can do it quickly. Margaret is asking, I just lost it here. I had it. Margaret is asking, and this is a good question about the relationship between the state and the federal government. If the state has a green amendment, but the federal government does not. So how would the green amendment affect the US Air Force as they pollute our water, fail to disclose, and drag their feet cleaning it up?
I need to answer this one because, as you may know, I was a plaintiff in the litigation against Kirtland Air Force Base for that plume, the jet fuel plume.
Mm-hmm.
And the case was dismissed in federal court. I can't tell you how hard we worked to get the environmental department of the state of New Mexico to join the litigation. And they did not. And their reason was they simply didn't have the resources to do it. They wished us well, but they just didn't have the manpower. With a green amendment that would change the priorities. And I believe that the departments, the environmental department needs probably 3 or 4 times the resources it has right now. It's barely gotten to the place, and not quite gotten to the place where it was before Susana Martinez and those 8 years just devastated the department. So yes, it would make the state, it would push the state to be involved in litigation like that. And I believe, and this is just me, I believe that the litigation that we brought was dismissed in part because the state wasn't there.
So that's a very good point.
The court thought this was the state's job. And I thought so too, but.
And I think that that's such a great perspective that Senator Sedillo Lopez is bringing to this is that total reorientation of government action and activity and focus and priority and funding reshapes the way different kinds of things can happen in terms of state involvement. But I do also want to bring to the point that this question really does highlight why, as part of our National Green Amendment movement, we're not stopping with the states, because, you know, it is true that the state Green Amendment is going to be focused on state government action and activity, right? We're not going to use the New Mexico Green Amendment to go after the US Congress or the Department of Defense directly, because it's about the behavior of New Mexico's government officials. But when we get to the right tipping point, when we have enough states that are advancing this powerful concept, and we have shifted the conversation in our nation to realize and recognize, getting people to understand, realize and recognize that they want and need constitutional protection of their environmental rights at the state level, we will also be bringing them along to realize that they need a constitutional green amendment. We all need a constitutional green amendment at the federal level. And there will be some tipping point when we will be poised to go after that federal constitutional green amendment at the same time. And that is the amendment that will be able to be used to directly hold accountable federal government officials. So we need them both, but starting at the state level is strategically the best play. Both to get near-term, effective, successful constitutional environmental rights for all people across the nation, because the states have an immense level of power when it comes to environmental protection, but also to lay the foundation so that we will be building towards that federal green amendment, which will be that powerful additional complement focused on government action and government activity. You know, and you can hear how powerfully Senator Sedillo Lopez speaks about the Green Amendment, how powerfully it, from such an informed perspective, both in her role as an attorney, as a legislator, as an environmental advocate, as a litigant. And it is because of leaders like her coming on early in this Green Amendment process that we are building towards that national tipping point so much more quickly than I had anticipated, because we just have such powerful voices. And really, really, truly, New Mexico is front of the line and is truly the state that I point to. And I can just tell you, I'm already getting in the works for a second edition of the book, and New Mexico is going to be a big part of the second edition.
That's great. Well, we only have 5-6 minutes left, and there's one question here, and I think then I've gotten all of them. And this is from Pat, directed to Antoinette directly. And she's asking, and I think she's referring to your comment that you made at the beginning. What legislation has passed in New Mexico that is good for the environment? And what failed? And what legislation do you plan to reintroduce if it failed?
My the legislation that Senator Worth brought forward to make it possible that New Mexico's regulations could be more stringent than the federal government regulations, because we had this language that our regulation couldn't be more stringent than federal legislation. And that, I think, is going to be a great thing for future legislation, is that we're not limited by the federal government. Mimi Stewart, Senator Mimi Stewart, I joked with her that it was like the pause on fracking without the pause. She did not like that joke. It basically, she created a task force that is going to do some planning around the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. That passed, and I thought that was great, and I'm real excited to see that move forward. And the Green Amendment would provide more impetus for that. I thought getting the community solar, it could have been a little stronger, but getting what we got with community solar was great, and good legislation for our state so that we can expand solar, you know, to people who don't have the rooftops to be able to do it. So those are three that come to mind off the top of my head that we were able to pass last session that we had not been able to pass. And that I want to thank all of you for, because it was the election of people like Senator Pope, Senator Brenda McKenna, people like that made all the difference in getting that legislation passed. And, you know, eliminating, you know, removing from the Senate some of the people who were the biggest blocks of legislation like that. So I want to thank you, because I know all of you worked so hard to do that. As for future legislation, I was very disappointed with the produced water bill not going forward. But and this happens a lot, you have to look at your victories where you find them. The OCD has passed regulations that do what I was trying to accomplish with having a consequence for spilling produced water. It is now a state regulation. So they've done by state regulation what I was trying to do by statute. And I am thrilled about that. And they said that to me, that, you know, that that the statute was, or the bill was a model. Now, my concern, if God forbid, we got somebody like Susana Martinez to summarily reverse that, that would be really, really sad. And that's another reason we need the Green Amendment.
Mhm. Thank you. In the chat, there's discussion, and I want to say my thank you too. I didn't realize that Susan Selvin had originally invited Maya to New Mexico. And I wanted to thank Susan. You never know where your actions, you know, lead. And I think Susan started a movement here.
So I do want to, though, make sure I give credit. So Susan was a very powerful, important part of my first visit to New Mexico. But I do want to say that the very first person that called me and started the conversation and why I came to New Mexico in the very first place was Mike Neese. So if any of you know Mike, and Mike very quickly introduced me to Susan and her film festival. And so, yeah, Susan was a real important part of my very first trip and coming here and connecting me with all the right people. But I do just want to acknowledge that Mike Neese was that very first set of phone calls. And it's because he heard me on a radio show. So just like you said, you never know where it leads. And
Yeah.
Susan, including me in the film festival, that has just had so many tentacles out into the New Mexico communities. And I'm so grateful to her and looking forward to being a part of the new film festival.
That's
Me too.
wonderful. Well, that's one of the things I've learned, especially this past week with the water protectors up in the native lands in northern Minnesota, is how important relationships are. And this whole movement requires relationships. And that's what we're building with this Zoom, with other avenues. And so I want to thank both of you very, very much for joining us.
And I want to give a shout out. I just noticed that that Terry Sloan is here. He's on the board of the Green Amendments for the Generations. And
Good.
he also was last night on the Green Amendment Day, a very, very powerful voice for how the Green Amendment can help with environmental justice. So wanted to give that shout out. I don't know if I can, I see so many of you that I know.
Yeah.
Some of them are just names, but it's great to see everyone. I'm very, very excited about this Green Amendment and the potential it has. Like I said, it is my highest environmental priority right now.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Terry Sloan, as well. I watched you last night. It was very moving to hear you. I'm going to end with one final ask that everybody could do, and that is to sign the petition. And I think there's a link, Lloyd, if I've given that to you.
You have, and I'll drop it into the chat again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If everybody, before you leave, if you have not signed the petition, that's how we're building the movement. That's how we're building relationship. And you can certainly invite others to sign it as well. Take that link and share. As soon as we have this recording up and on the PDACNM website, this will be a resource to share as well.
I'd also like to offer that if you see all these resources from our presenters and all the questions and from the great participants, and you want to save it, you can click on the 3 dots or ellipses at the bottom of the chat window and choose to save the contents of the chat window. So you don't have to like handwrite notes. So it can be really a nice feature to save that contents.
Well, I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to make another little ask, and that is if you donate to Sierra Club or 350 or any of these organizations, why don't you put on your check that you want them to use it for Green Amendment advocacy? Because I want to support them as much as I can in devoting resources. And I know that many times, everywhere I go, resources. So if you, and I don't know how, I just knowing this crowd, I have a feeling this is a crowd that is supportive of various organizations. Just limit your donation to Green Amendment advocacy, and we'll have more resources for this advocacy.
Great.
And
Thank
can
you
I
very much.
acknowledge that, PDACNM has been a really important part of the movement. Again, as I said, right from the get-go, very active in our strategy development and discussions and implementation. And we really are working very hard as a collective to plan for how to advance the Green Amendment to and through success in the coming months. And so having the powerful voices of experienced people like Laura and others with PDACNM that are really hands-on engaged in this is so powerful. Because like I tell people, as the founder of Green Amendments for the Generations, I have a lot of information, I have a lot of experience to bring to the table, but I can't make a Green Amendment happen in New Mexico. You all are going to make the Green Amendment happen in New Mexico. I just want to be one of the partners to help. And so that kind of engagement and leadership is so valuable. And so thank you, Laura and Susan and Senator Sedillo Lopez and Senator Pope, who's gone, and Terry, and everybody who's been engaged. It's because of all of you that we will achieve victory in New Mexico and beyond.
Thank you. And I think I see Linda Starr has her hand up for a question.
Oh, and Linda's here. Where is it? See, like Antoinette said, so many engaged people. Linda was there on the very first fracking tour.
Well, and also the very first film festival and the very first Indivisible Nob Hill presentation that Maya made. So she's been inspiring ever since. I just wanted to put in a big thank you to Laura, because she has put an enormous effort into all of this and into yesterday's panel presentations as well. So I am really grateful for all the work that she's put in. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Laura,
let's
at this
give-
point, I'd like to stop the recording. And
Okay.
so